day of the Karen Read trial, Commonwealth versus Karen Read. Remember, the Commonwealth is accusing her of hitting her boyfriend with her car intentionally, a second-degree homicide, and leaving him to die in the snow. The defense started their opening statement with Karen Read was framed. And their theory of the case is that this is a cover up and that Karen Read is a convenient outsider. So when victim officer O'Keefe of the Boston Police Department was found in the front yard of Officer Albert, also from the Boston Police Department, whose brother works at the Canton Police Department, that Karen Read is the one who got stuck with the charges for something that happened earlier in the night. This morning, it seems that the prosecution is starting to get into the events the night that John O'Keefe passed away, or night into next morning that John O'Keefe passed away. We have started with what seems to be one of his very close family friends who talked about the fact that their daughters were very close, that their sons were friendly, that they spent almost every Friday over at the O'Keefe house, that he has known defendant Karen Read for about a year because she was dating John O'Keefe, and that they were very close. Their kids were close, and he had a code to the garage door, the side door of the house, to get in and out of the house, and that they went over to the O'Keefe residence, himself and his daughter, that evening. The girls stayed at the home, and then John and the witness went out to a local bar, CF McCarthy's, and there they started drinking. Karen Read met them, and then Kurt Roberts met them, and then another individual that they kind of knew from kids playing baseball together who just happened to be there also kind of joined their group. We saw video from CF McCarthy's of them drinking together. We saw Karen Read come in and, give the victim a kiss on the cheek, and he kind of patted her back and went through a lot of the points of time of that evening and them interacting together. That is a much longer video. Of course, the entire video will be entered into evidence for the jury if they want to watch the entirety themselves down the road. The prosecution just highlighted bits and pieces showing what the victim was wearing and how they were interacting together. Then it kind of gave us the timeline of why that witness left the bar. His kid was playing like backyard roller hockey with friends and got a tooth knocked out. He said the status of the tooth remains unknown, but he left the bar around 11 p.m., went to go pick up his son at a friend's house, went to go pick up his daughter at the O'Keefe residence, and then took them back to his house, charged his phones, and went to bed. He was awoken the next morning around 6 a.m. with the phone ringing, saw that he missed calls from both his wife and Karen Read, and then called his wife back. And his wife asked him to go back and pick up John O'Keefe's niece at home because she was home alone. At that point, he didn't seem to know much of what happened to John or much of what was going on with Karen. But at that time in the morning, Karen, I believe, was at the hospital from the timing, which is tough because the prosecution hasn't tied the timeline together well. And there's no timestamps on the Ring doorbell footage. But John was at the hospital, and I believe Karen was either still at the scene or at the hospital. So they went and picked up the niece and took her back home to be with his daughter. At some point later in the morning, he took John O'Keefe's niece, Kaylee, back to John O'Keefe's residence because John's younger brother, who testified first in this trial, called to let him know that John O'Keefe had passed and asking to bring Kaylee back to the house. On the stand before lunch is the bartender from the Waterfall who was testifying about who was there with the group with victim officer John O'Keefe and Karen Read, including Caitlin Albert, a name you may know because, Katie McLaughlin, the paramedic, went to high school with somebody by that name and or is very friendly with Caitlin Albert. But Caitlin Albert was at the bar at the Waterfall. Brian Albert was at the bar at the Waterfall. Brian Higgins was at the bar at the Waterfall with Karen Read and Officer O'Keefe. The last place they were before they went to 34 Fairview. Right before lunch, we were looking at the time on the video as the bar was closing. That bar was closing up right at about 12:10 a.m. So now we have a little bit more of a timeline based on text messages and based on security footage. that bar was closing. The entire staff was out by 12:17. So we see people leaving that bar right around 12:10 a.m. and we start to get a timeline. We have not gotten into forensic evidence, cell phone, where the cell phones are going. We have not gotten into pathologists, how much Karen Read was drinking, any of that. We are going to be rejoining court. We are going to be resuming the cross-examination. And that is where we're at so far. At the end of day 7 of the Commonwealth versus Karen Read, all day today, we had civilian witnesses that were establishing the timeline and interactions between the defendant and the victim the night leading into the early morning hours before Officer O'Keefe was found at 34 Fairview. So we heard from witnesses who were out early at C.F. McCarthy's bar with the defendant and the victim. We heard from witnesses that were then later at the waterfall with the defendant and the victim. And then we saw surveillance video from both bars, saw the surveillance video wrapping, and the entire bar at the waterfall shut down by like 12:17 a.m. the morning of the 29th, and seeing everybody leaving that bar around 12:10 with a light dusting of snow outside, and the victim walking out of the bar in a black hat, a hoodie that's gray with black sleeves, and carrying a clear glass. From the one watch of the video, the prosecution didn't ask about this at all, but from the one watch of the video, it looked like he finished a beer and picked up the remainder of a drink off the table. It might have been Karen Read's drink. It's consistent with what she was drinking. Picked that up, walked out of the bar with it, and was walking down the road with it. A lot of you asked, is he allowed to do that? No. But did he? Yes. Yes. So we got into the friends and community of Officer John O'Keefe, the relationships between John O'Keefe's mostly niece and her friends and their parents, and really talking about not just the connectedness, but the support this community had for each other, and really spending some lovely time together. We saw how really just lovely this friend group was. And everyone who talked about Karen Read in testimony today talked about her love for John O'Keefe. The last two witnesses talked about the fact that she admired him and was talking about how much he sacrificed to take care of his niece and nephew. One witness said that Karen Read stated she very much wished the other members of John O'Keefe's family would step up and help with the kids a little bit so that she and John could spend a bit more time together, and that they had a vacation planned and she was excited about that vacation. Nothing in my mind at this point that goes to ill feelings, things that are very normal. It seemed that the thing Karen Read wanted to do was spend some money on the kids and spoil them a little bit and spend a bit more time with John O'Keefe, who all these witnesses stated she admired very much and who had a good relationship and were very connected and very lovey-dovey and kind of hugging on each other and touching each other and just really being very connected that evening. And one of the witnesses joked that his wife mentioned, like, you're not like that with me. And then he said, but I spent a lot of time with my wife. The last two witnesses on the stand were a married couple, husband and wife, the Kolakathises. They were really delightful witnesses. And it's really is a very different tenor and tone from what we had through the first days of trial with the police witnesses. So I think we will continue seeing this timeline of the group at the waterfall leaving and going to 34 Fairview. But we now know that 34 Fairview is about 5 to 7 minutes away from the waterfall, that everybody was leaving about 12:10 p.m., that Karen and the defendant were last seen walking towards Karen's car. I don't know if we will see any witnesses that saw Karen get into the driver's side and drive away. We will get into that. I wonder if the reason the prosecution told the jury on the jury view to pay attention to the interior of the car is because Karen Read doesn't strike me as a particularly tall woman, and John O'Keefe was over 6'2". And I wonder if the placement of the driver's seat is what the prosecution was asking them to look at. Look, we know that Karen Read was driving the car because the car went back and was parked at John O'Keefe's house and didn't move. Then again, if he had moved the seat back, she could have just changed it back when she drove it back to John O'Keefe's house later. But I wonder if that's one of the things they were considering is, look, we know she was driving. But they have charged a driving under the influence causing death to Karen Read, and they haven't really gotten into anyone that seems to have seen Karen Read inebriated. Everybody except for the last witness, was drinking and then left the location. But the bartender didn't seem to believe Karen Read was all that intoxicated. Others didn't indicate that Karen Read was all that intoxicated. So the prosecution still has a long way to go. I think what we've ended the day with is that Karen and John were a loving couple that had a lovely night at the bar with friends. And then something happened, and we don't know what. For deep dives into the stories that I covered here, you can find them on my YouTube channel at The